Hello, Mr. Nava. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Mhm.
Welcome to the Library of Congress's Cine Latina interview series. This series is dedicated to sharing and documenting the work of emerging and established Latina filmmakers. My name is Mateo Arango. I'm a junior fellow working on the Cine Latina project this summer. I'm also a PhD student in American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. My research looks at material culture and cultural production as a form of documenting marginalized histories in Latin America.
Mhm.
And I am honored to be working on this important project this summer alongside junior fellows Carla Camacho and Madeline Griffin, and our project mentor, Danny Thurber. We are working together on this project to create what will be the first resource dedicated to Latina film in the library's history. They are off camera at the moment, but Carla and Madeline will come in later to introduce themselves and ask a few questions. Today, we are here with the amazing Gregory Nava. Mr. Nava is a Mexican-American film director, writer, and producer from San Diego, California. He attended UCLA Film School, and his filmmaking career has highlighted the narratives and perspectives of the Latina community. Mr. Nava's directorial works include the 1984 film El Norte and 1997 film Selena, which were both inducted into the Library of Congress's National Film Registry. These films were deemed historically, culturally, and aesthetically important to American film history. Some of Gregory Nava's other works include the films The Confessions of Amans, which won the Best First Feature Award at the Chicago International Film Festival, Mi Familia, which won the Bravo Award for Outstanding Feature Film. Some other films include Why Do Fools Fall in Love, A Time of Destiny, Border Town, the screenplay for Frida, and the PBS drama American Family. Mr. Nava was also the recipient of the National Hispanic Media Coalition's Impact Award for Director of the Year in 2000. Thank you so much for joining us here today and speaking with us. We have many questions to get into, so let's get started with our first set of questions. For these first few questions, I will pass it over to Madeline to get us started.
Thanks for that introduction, Mateo, and thank you again for speaking with us today. My name is Madeline Griffin, and while I have the honor to work on the Cine Latine project as a junior fellow this summer, during the normal academic year, I am a graduate student pursuing an MA in Latin American Studies at the University of New Mexico. Today, I'm going to start our conversation by asking you a bit about your background and inspiration. So to get us started, when did you know that you wanted to pursue filmmaking as a career?
Well, when I was a little boy, my family, and I come from a border family. I want to really emphasize that because that really influences all the work that I've done. I was born and my family lived in San Diego, but I have all kinds of tios and tias and, padrinos and primos in Tijuana because it was the same family divided by the border. But, they lived like the Mexican part of the family lived like 15 or 20 minutes from us. So, we were always going across the border. And so really, I consider myself to be from San Diego and Tijuana, a border family, bicultural, bilingual, and right at the place where the two cultures meet and clash, the United States and Tijuana. And the contrast between the two worlds is very graphic. San Diego, because it's a military town, is very Republican and very squeaky clean. And Tijuana, of course, has tremendous poverty because people from all over Latin America are trying to cross into the United States. So it's like a dam. And there's all these, when I was growing up, all the cardboard cities, ciudades perdidas, lost cities right across the border. So it is the only place in the world where the first and third world meet, and it is a very graphic contrast with only a fence and a field separating the two worlds. So this is the world that I was raised in, and it has influenced all of my filmmaking and all of my work and my perspective on the United States and Mexico and the whole world that we live in. Now, when I was a kid, we went to the movies all the time. I was from a real movie-going family. We'd go to drive-ins, we'd go to movies. And for me, they were always magical. You'd go into this room, it would get dark, the theater would get dark, and then these images would come up, and they were like dreams. And I just felt that they were like dreams. And then when I was a little boy, we all went to see a movie called The Ten Commandments. And this was a big, epic biblical film. I came from a very devout Catholic family, and so it was like everybody had to go see this biblical epic. And unlike other films, the original version of the Ten Commandments did not start with credits or with a scene. It started with an image of Cecil B. DeMille, the director of the movie, coming out from behind a curtain and talking to the audience about the film that they were going to see, describing it was the story of freedom against oppression and the story of Moses, and that they drew, inspiration not only from the Bible, but from the Midrash and all these other sources, and that they took the cameras to Mount Sinai and Egypt. We would be traveling there, that it would take 3.5 hours to unfold, and he hoped that we enjoyed it. And then he steps back. It's a movie of him, by the way. It's a film of him saying this. Then suddenly, the music comes on and the credits come on and the movie begins. And so suddenly here I was this little boy, and I went, that guy made this movie. It was the first time that I understood that somebody made those dreams that I went to see as a little boy. And I mean, you see the Red Sea parting and Pharaoh's chariots and all of this amazing stuff and, thousands of extras. And I just sat there and I went, that's what I want to do. I want to do what he does. So since I was a little boy, even before I went to kindergarten, I've always had my eye on being a filmmaker and telling stories in film. And I would like to say, when you see a Cecil B. DeMille film, there's all these huge scenes with tremendous actors, of course. And so when I was working on Selena, and we did the Houston Astrodome scene, actually, we didn't use any CGI. There was no crowd replication for that scene because 35,000 people showed up, and they filled the Alamo Dome in San Antonio to shoot the opening scene of Selena. And I remember sitting in there in the middle of this stadium full of 35,000 people with all of this, musicians, and huge. And I thought to myself, CB, I made it.
Certainly sounds like you made your own epic. So congratulations for sharing it with us. And then my next question for this section.
Well, I'll just say one thing is that I do have an epic vision, in terms of my films. They're very much inspired by mythology, very much inspired. One of the great inspirations for my films has been Latin American dream realist literature. In fact, El Norte is often credited with being the film that brought that style to the screen, the dream realism of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Miguel Angel Asturias and all the great Latin American writers. And of course, all of their novels are epic, huge epic novels, because our world has so much, our Latino world is like a volcano erupting with all of the issues that we have to deal with that I was talking about when I made El Norte. And really, they're still there today. We have tremendous movements of people. We have huge change. We are affecting this country. We help build this country, in war and in peace. Tremendous themes, social issues, social problems, conflicts of cultures. It's huge what's going on in our culture. And all of these things were captured in novels like 100 Years of Solitude and El Señor Presidente. And I was very much influenced by that. And that's what to this day, what I want to bring to the screen, to tell our story. So when you see my cinema, like El Norte, for example, it is an epic film. It was called by Variety when it was released, the first American independent epic. And it is the epic journey of Rosa and Enrique from Guatemala, through genocide, through Mexico, into the United States and everything that happens to them. It's an epic film. So I believe in that. That is my style, but it's also very intimate. It's the intimate story of Rosa and Enrique, and it's very tender. So the intimate epic, this describes all of my films. Mi Familia, Selena, they're all intimate epic films in which I try to tell the story of our people to the world. And I do believe very firmly, and this is one of the great mottos or adages that I dedicate my cinema to, and that is that if you tell the story of your village, you tell the story of the world.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing some of those stories with us. And I'm sure you have many more to tell, which we're excited to see. And you've already mentioned and talked a little bit about this, but if you would like to expand on it, please do. Are there any other films or filmmakers specifically who have influenced your work?
Well, obviously, one of the things that was very influential in my work and continues to be, were very inspiring to me. Like I said, I was born on the border. So, we would go out to see, movies, but also at that time, they were bringing all the great golden age of Mexican cinema to television. I would watch them. I was raised in the same household with my abuelos, with my grandmother and my grandfather. And so I would watch with my abuela all the great films by Emilio Fernandez, like Enamorada and Pueblerina, all these great movies. Which filmed by Gabriel Figueroa, the great DP. And so those films were very much inspirational to me, and the work of Emilio Fernandez was very inspirational to me. And then, of course, Luis Buñuel, he was a great Spanish director, but he came to Mexico and, of course, really started his great film career in Mexico, making masterpieces like Los Olvidados. And, of course, that film was very influential on El Norte. And all of these films reflect the poetic realist style that you see in Latin American Mexican realism. And of course, in the case of Buñuel, he was a surrealist. So he brought in dreams and visions into his films. So all of these things were influential to me as a young boy. By the same token, I would also see on TV, they were bringing all the Errol Flynn films, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Humphrey Bogart. And of course, we were going out to the new Hollywood movies. So I was very influenced by Hollywood films, obviously, the great films. I remember the first time I saw Citizen Kane by Orson Welles, which was on television. I went out of my mind because here you saw a movie that broke the barriers of what film could do. So I was very much influenced by that film. I was very much influenced by Emilio Fernandez. And then subsequently, when I was in high school, they started bringing all the great foreign films. Akira Kurosawa was a tremendous influence on me. His film Ikiru was hugely influential to me. Seven Samurai, Yojimbo. And then the great Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray, the Opu trilogy, Charulata, Mahanangar, all of those great films were very influential to me, as well as the great European directors like Ingmar Bergman. I was also very influenced by Italian neorealism, Bicycle Thief, and La Terra Trema by Luchino Visconti. La Terra Trema is another film that was especially influential on El Norte. These were films that were talking about, they weren't escapist films like Hollywood films, which is all, musicals with Gene Kelly or whatever. No, suddenly here were films that were about real people, real situations, dealing with the real thing. And a lot of these films, like the Japanese films and the films from India, they were not European. I don't see my Mexican-American heritage, my Mexican heritage as being European, because of our indigenous roots. So I liked to also be influenced by non-European models, artistic models. I really am a great believer in cultural equity. And in films by great filmmakers like Yasujiro Ozu and Kenji Mizoguchi and, Akira Kurosawa and Satyajit Ray and all these amazing non-European filmmakers, great inspiration for my cinema. In addition to the great, Mexican Golden Age cinema, which is also to a very great extent influenced by our indigenous cultures and its very sympathetic portrayal of indigena, native people. At the same time that Hollywood in the 40s and 50s was making movies that celebrated the genocide of native people in the American Western, At that same time, Mexican cinema was celebrating Native people and showing how beautiful Native culture is in films like Maria Candelaria and Maclovia and Rio Escondido, these great films by Emilio Fernandez, who was himself Native. His nickname was El Indio, the Indian, because he was Native, right? His mother was Kickapoo. So he brought a whole different vision to the cinema about indigenous culture and Native people. Very different from the genocide you saw in Hollywood, where Indians were seen as savages. Suddenly, here they are in Maria Candelaria or Maclovia, these great masterpieces. And another one is Macario by Roberto Galvadon, where you see Native people with hopes and dreams, three-dimensional characters, tremendous. This was very influential on me. And you see this in very strongly in El Norte, because again, the protagonists of El Norte are indigena people. So I was very much influenced by all of those films, and they all have played a part in the cinema that I make. And I feel very strongly about studying film and being influenced by the great filmmakers, studying literature. We talked about Latin American dream realist literature, studying painting. I'm very much influenced by Jose Clemente Orozco, very much influenced by Diego Rivera, all the great painters from our great Latin American heritage, and the great Chicano painters, Patsy Valdez and Carmen Lomas Garza. They have all been influential on me. And I reached a point in my career where I was actually able to hire Patsy Valdez to paint a series of paintings to inspire the production design and the interiors of the film Mi Familia. And by the same token, Carmen Lomas Garza, I worked with her doing the film Selena, because she's a great Tejana painter, to bring the visuals of that world to the film Selena. So I like to throw a very wide net in terms of what influences me as a filmmaker, because I think that films reflect a huge amount of culture. They bring everything together in this visual storytelling. So I always encourage young filmmakers, throw a wide net, study painting, study literature, study history, see films from all over the world, see silent movies. Don't just narrow your vision on the latest movie that Marvel is making. Don't just have yourself be influenced by, the latest, Avengers film. Look beyond that and find the things that can inspire you and influence you with what you're trying to say. So that's a big message that I have for young filmmakers, is to really allow yourself to be inspired by many, many different things. That only makes your films richer, and it only makes your films more important as we struggle together to get our story told and brought to the screen for our country and the world.
Well, thank you for sharing that advice. I know there would be a
What
lot of
movies have you seen that influenced you? Boy, you didn't realize that.
all of them. No, it's a beautiful answer, and I think it's the truth. It's artists are inspired by everything that they see and interact with in the world, and it's important for future filmmakers to hear that. And so I'm sure that
And my mother always used to say, I'm not telling you anything about our family because you put it in the movies, like Mi Familia and Time of Destiny. You're always putting stuff, family secrets on the screen. So I'm also got to say that I've been very much influenced by my family and the members of my family, and there are certain characters in my family who always reoccur in my movies based on aunts and uncles and primos and all, because I also think that you're very much influenced by your immediate family, the people that they're real to you, and they help you make those characters live on the screen. So there's also your personal experience and your personal journey, which I think is very important to your cinema.
Yeah, thank you for sharing some of that with us. I'm glad we got to learn some of those secrets. And for now, I will pass it over to Mateo, who will ask you a bit about your process as an artist.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you so much, Mr. Nava, for sharing this insight into all these different influences, looking at literature, cinema, all the things that have informed your work is really fascinating. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your filmmaking process and your experience
You
as
know,
a
I'll tell you a story. Let me know I'll tell you a story about that for 1 minute.
Okay.
And that is that it really came together for me when El Norte was first released. And of course, it made tremendous impact, you know, in the United States and everywhere. And and it was at Cannes and various festivals, but it was at a film festival in Spain called Huelva. And they showed it at this festival, and it was tremendously successful. And I went into the hotel at Huelva, and this old man comes up to me. And it was Emilio Fernandez. And I spoke about how influential his great films were to me and to my films. And Emilio Fernandez got on his knees
Wow.
in front of me and threw up his arms and congratulated me for El Norte. And he very much saw immediately when he saw that film that it was continuing what he wanted to do. And he felt that Mexican cinema had sort of lost that, right? And, you know, this in-depth celebration of indigenous culture and people. And he threw up his arms and he congratulated me and felt like in some way I was continuing his work. And I said, you can't, Don Emilio, you can't possibly be kneeling in front of me. And I pulled him up, you know, and hugged him. And so then we went off together and we drank all night and shared stories all night. And I had a marvelous time with him, and then got the Telluride Film Festival to give him a Life Achievement Award, which he received and got honored at that festival. And then I think a month after that, he passed. So, you know, that's a story about how these influences, sometimes they come full circle on you. And for me, that was a very beautiful moment.
Absolutely. Really fascinating to see that come to life, right? Full circle moment.
Yeah.
So for my first question, I was wondering, how is representation important to you when it comes to casting for a film or deciding who is in the writing room for a film? How does
Well,
that?
I think that, you know, here we're getting involved in a very big question, and I've been very much involved in inclusivity and diversity movements in Hollywood. You know, I was the first head of the Academy's A2020 initiative to try to make the Academy more inclusive, and was responsible for hundreds of people, you know, becoming members of the Academy, Latinas, and you know, many others from other parts of the world who deserved to be members of the Academy and who weren't. So I've been super involved in inclusivity, and I'm still on the inclusion committee for the Academy Museum, and I do a lot of work in this way. But I want to be really clear about something. I want to start off on the right foot with this, because what you're asking is what we continually get hit with, you know, who hiring this person, getting a writer, getting a cinematographer, and what happens is that suddenly it becomes a numbers game. And the numbers are pathetic. There's only like 2% of people in movies are Latina, even though we're 20% of the population, you know, and there's like 0 directors, 0, you know, very little. So numbers are important. I'm not saying they're not. And studios like, oh, we hired more Latinos and we hired more this, we hired them. And they say, we're taking care of our diversity because we've hired somebody to be Ant-Man's friend, okay? Which is great. I mean, I'm glad Michael's Ant-Man's friend. I think that's good, all right? But it's not enough, and it is not at the heart of what the problem is. So I want to reform this discussion that you're having with me along the following lines. True diversity and true inclusion comes when we get to have our story told. And that's what's not happening. We have to tell our story, show who we are to this country and the world, show our heart to people, okay? And we have this amazing history, all these incredible people, incredible stories between the United States and Mexico and Latino America, and here in the United States, I'll give you one example. My father fought in World War II. He fought in Italy in World War II. All right. He comes home and we used to go see World War II movies together. There was never a Mexican-American soldier in any movie ever. Look at them. They're not there. And yet more medals of honor went to our people than any other group. We were the most heroic soldiers fighting in the US Army. But were we ever seen on the screen? Was our story ever told? Our GIs who fought and spilled their blood for this country? Never. The first time a Mexican-American GI's story was told was on my television show, American Family, where we told the story of a soldier in the Korean War. It had never been done before. We have to have our stories told. People need to see who we are. All they see are narcos, narcos, narcos. How many narco shows do they make? Okay? That's not who we are. That's not our story. So yes, numbers are important. Casting is important. Getting a Latino in the writer's room is important. It's very important. But it is more important if that Latino is writing and that actress or actor are portraying themselves in lead roles in our story. We're writing our stories, directing our stories, telling who we are for this country and for our industry to make these films. That's what's at the essence of what this discussion needs to be and what true inclusion is, getting our stories told.
Thank you so much. And absolutely, that is at the heart of what needs to be representation in cinema, a diversity of all these nuanced experiences that encompass the Latino world in the US. And so for my next question, I want to dive in specifically to El Norte, and again, think more about these cultural stories and the details that you've been able to portray through your cinema.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about representing indigenous culture, like textiles, traditional music, and cultural practices in the making of your National Film Registry selected film, El Norte?
Well, that's a very excellent question because it's complex, all right? And here's the thing, I'm going to go back when we talk about, I always use the term dream realism. I don't say magical realism. Normally people say magical realism when they refer to 100 Years of Solitude or like Water for Chocolate. It's very interesting because I was on a panel recently with Laura Esquivel and we were talking about this and we both have the same feeling about it. I like to use the term dream realism because what we're talking about isn't magic, Tinkerbell, it kind of diminishes it or makes it less important if it's magical. What we're connecting to is a deep collective unconscious when we do these things. And that great underground river that flows throughout our world are our indigenous roots. Because our whole culture is fed by our native Mayan, Mexica, Purepecha roots, which is still living and very much alive. And what I wanted to show, in El Norte. And when you read the El Señor Presidente, Hombres de Maíz by Miguel Ángel Asturias, the great Guatemalan writer, or 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, they don't let you off the hook. True dream realism isn't just about these incredible, fantastic images like the white butterflies and all of these incredible things that you see in El Norte. It is also about showing the harsh social reality of what these cultures and our people have to face. Because if all you have are beautiful huipiles and people playing guitar, harps and marimbas and dancing, all you have is cultural tourism. You have to know what wearing that huipil means. It meant in Guatemala, when we shot El Norte, that they would kill you because you were wearing a huipil. Genocide. Okay? And it still exists. The oppression of indigenous people is horrible in our world. All right? Awful. So you can, to me, you can only put people with their beauty, and the culture is magnificent. You look at that highland Mayan culture in Guatemala, unbelievably beautiful. The music, the dress, everything about it is spectacular, right? But we need to see the social reality of what Mayan people have to live through and what they have to face and what their life is really like. Then you can show that beautiful huipil, because you know what that huipil means, what Mayan people have had to suffer since the conquest, right? We have to show those things. That is important. So I am against folklore. I'm against cultural tourism massively. I think that you need to show the truth of what that world is. And it is the world that feeds us. It is so when we connect to it, and we connect to the imagery, and we connect to the beautiful, the Popol Vuh and the Chilambalam and the beautiful huipiles, we connect to all that. We're connecting to something very, very powerful. It defines us, who we are. Yes. And we have to show the harsh reality of what that means and what people have suffered and continue to suffer. Yes, we have to show the joy. I'll tell you that. When I made El Norte, as you know, the film has some hilarious scenes in it, as well as tragic scenes. And the Mayan people, the refugees I was working with who were part of the Canjoval community, they all said, humor is really important to us, because without humor, we can't survive. So you have to show that in your movie, or we don't want to work with you. So I learned that from them, how important humor is to people who are oppressed. And you can't really capture the truth of who they are unless you show them in their full flower of who they are as human beings, you know, and truly able to celebrate joy in the midst of all this tragedy is a truly inspiring thing. So I wanted to capture that as well in El Norte and really put on the screen a very powerful, beautiful, and well-rounded depiction of Mayan life and Mayan people in the film. And so there's a lot to your question when you say, oh, gee, you have the huipiles and the, you know, and the harps. But that opens a huge door in terms of everything that you want to bring to the screen and make people feel when they watch the film and when you understand the journey of Rosa and Enrique.
Thank you so much for doing that work, and not only the mere inclusion of these cultures, but really diving into how embroideries and the cultural practices are a reflection of how these people have reconciled in the aftermath of this violence and really come together to share their own lived experiences from their perspectives, and really highlighting and emphasizing the importance of what that culture means to the people. And so thank you for that work. That's really, really inspiring. For my next question, I wanted to dive into the 1997 film Selena, which was also inducted into the Library of Congress's National Film Registry. And I was wondering, what were some of the highlights as well as challenges of making a film about such a celebrated cultural figure in the Latino community?
Well, you know, that was another very, very emotional journey, because Selena had just passed and everybody's memories were very fresh of everything that's in the movie. I don't think that there's any biopic in the history of cinema that was made so quickly after the events that were depicted. So much of what you see in the film is literally taken from people's memories of something that had just happened the year before. And the memories were very, very fresh. So I was very fortunate in that way. But by the same token, because the loss was so great, none of these people were healed by this horrendous event. So it was very, very emotional. And it was very important to the family to make the movie so quickly because so much negative stuff was coming out and they wanted to do something strong that would cement Selena's legacy in a positive and beautiful way. And all of us who made the film were very motivated it was a tragedy to do the best we could to try to make something positive and uplifting out of this tremendous tragedy and to keep Selena's light alive. So it was very different from other films I've worked on in that everybody, Jennifer, Eddie, Ed Lockman, the cameraman, all of the people that worked on the film, everybody put their ego at the door and everybody was focused on trying to channel Selena's light and bring it to the screen the best way that we possibly could. So the way that the cast and crew were united on that film was very inspiring. And also the help that we got from the Tejano community was overwhelming. I insisted that we shoot in Texas because I knew that we needed the support of the Tejano community. We wouldn't get that anywhere else. So I made reference to the fact that we filled a stadium with 35,000 people for the opening concert sequence in Selena. Well, they were not paid. They all came for free. We didn't have money to pay 35,000 extras. We didn't have money to pay 30 extras. We had no money. So we put an ad in the newspaper, come to the Sunday to the stadium and help us make the Selena film and come dressed as you would come to a Selena concert. And everybody, of course, had been to Selena's real concerts. We didn't know if anybody would show up. 35,000 people showed up. They stayed all day and they helped us shoot that scene. That kind of love and that kind of support, really just fills everybody working on the movie. And the family was there and it was very emotional for them to see that, very emotional for them to participate in that. So I think that when you talk about you making Selena, you're talking about a completely different kind of journey with the film than any I've ever experienced before. Now, there's a lot of sensitivities that go into a story like that. And I talked to, all of the major people who were involved in her story, and they didn't always agree with what they thought happened. I'll give you one very big example. That is when I was talking to Chris Perez, Selena's husband, he was saying, well, do you want to know what really happened or do you want to know what Abraham wants you to know? I said, I want to know what really happened. And he goes, well, the thing is that it really was Selena's idea to elope, not mine. She came to my hotel room. I was sneaking down to Corpus that day. And she said, we got to go do this because my dad's never going to let me marry you. And unless I show him, she's a very strong-willed person, Selena. And it was her idea that she didn't want to give up the guy she loved. And, she was proclaiming her independence, which I think is a very powerful thing. And really became like the main theme of the movie, right? That here you have that she's a tremendous role model, right? So Abraham always thought that it was Chris who corrupted his beautiful daughter by insisting that they elope, that his daughter would never disobey him and go out and elope against his desires. It must have been Chris who forced her to do it. So when he read the script, he hit the ceiling because, of course, in the script, I wrote the scene exactly the way Chris told me it happened. And he got really angry about that. And he said, no. I said, this is what happened. It was really Selena. And he goes, but we can't put it out like that, even if it's true, because you can't tell all the little girls that they should disobey their father. And I said, I understand that, but she was very strong. She was very independently minded. She knew her heart. She knew what she wanted. She knew that she had to do this. She knew you would forgive her. She knew all those things, right? He goes, well, yeah, that's true. So she was strong, and we got to show her being strong because that's what's a great role model for our young people, So I talked to him for hours, and finally, at the end of the day, he goes, well, if I have to look bad in order to make Selena look good, I'll do it. So ultimately, he went along with the script as I wanted to write it, and as it really happened in real life. And those are the kinds of things, you know, there are many other things like that, but those are the kinds of things that obviously you have to deal with when you're dealing with a real true story and a real family with a lot of sensitivities. But what was my guiding light? What was it that kept me on that course? And I think this is always true when you're making a movie, because you have a million distractions and a million things pulling you in all different directions. You have to say, what am I doing? What is this about? What do I want this movie to say? When this movie hits the screen, what do I want all of our young women, all of our men, all of our people, all of our culture, all of our country, all of our world, what do I want everybody to feel about this young woman? I want them to love her. I want them to feel her light. I want them to feel what an extraordinary woman she was, how she found her own voice and she found her own heart, how she found her independent self. And that's the most powerful message you can give to young people and to anybody. Find your own path in life. And Selena did that in a very powerful way and achieved things that nobody had been able to achieve before. Like her father says in the film, the Tejano music world was all men. She became the biggest star, a woman. In Mexico, they reject us. Pochos. She became the most popular star in Mexico as a Tejana. And then she was crossing over to the mainstream of the United States with her English language album, right? Hitting it huge. She was making these crossovers. She was only 24 years old when she died. When you think about that, it's overwhelming. That light, it's just overwhelming. And so that's what I focused on. Every beat of the way, all the interviews, all the writing of it, the directing of it, every choice I made was always about focusing on Selena's light and wanting to bring that to the screen, regardless of anything else, and not allowing there to be any distractions. And that's what we did. And I have to say that I think that focusing on that and the whole crew being so united and the whole Tejano community, I think in some way, shape, or form, Selena's light did come to us and it did lead us when we were making the film.
Thank you so much. And just this whole deep dive into your process and putting together El Norte and Selena is really insightful and powerful. The intention that you clearly put into the craft is amazing and inspiring. Thank you so much. I will now pass it over to Carla for our next set of questions.
Hi, hello, Mr. Nava. It is so great to be here with you. I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Carla. I am also a junior fellow here at the Library of Congress working on the Cine Latina project. And I'm a fellow fronteriza from Brownsville, Texas.
There you go. So you know the border world. You know, they say there are really 3 countries, you know. It's not Mexico and Los Estados Unidos. It's Mexico, the United States, and Mexico, which is the border. It's
exactly.
its own world. And people don't understand it, you know, and they don't understand what the border is like. I know what the border is like, but people in this country, they don't understand it. And I you know, obviously we were trying to bring this with El Norte very strongly in all my films, but I just wish if this country knew the border and understood the border, the whole country would have a much different attitude about immigration and about our relationship with Mexico and everything, because they really don't understand, you know, what the border is like and what the culture and the economy and the families on both sides of the border and what the whole world is like. They don't understand it. So they have a lot of wrong ideas, and you know, things like building a wall can gain a lot of popularity, which is obviously, as you know, completely ludicrous.
There's no place I'd rather be from. This is a great place to be from. But yeah, I'm a recent graduate from Yale University. I studied ethnic studies and education. And my interest is the history of the US-Mexico borderlands. So that's kind of where my first question is going to. As part of this project, we've also been researching the long history.
Well, I have a
of-
question for you.
Yeah.
You said that you studied ethnic studies. What does that mean?
For me, what it meant I took predominantly history classes, but they focused on, in my case, like Mexican American studies, Latino studies, things like that. So to me, it meant like the freedom to study the places and communities that I was that I come from. Yeah.
But here's the thing. Why is that branded ethnic? And like history gets to be about Napoleon and Henry VIII or Thomas Jefferson, but our history is ethnic. And I have this whole thing about that word ethnic. It bugs me. It's like, in the old days when I would present projects like El Norte, you have an ethnic project, and you go like, you don't want to be ethnic. It's like a venereal disease, It's like, how do I not be ethnic, right? So now, it's a bit, it's a diverse project. It's a Latina project. It's a little better, but, I look forward to the day when we can all be at the table and we're all, there's cultural equity, that we aren't somehow ghettoized with being ethnic, which is such an ugly word, where we can just be, like everybody else, and we're all equal, and we all have our stories to tell, and everybody equally celebrates everybody's history and culture, and we're all mutually embraced. That's what I look forward to, and what I work in my films to try to achieve, right? So that we can get away from this ghettoizing of our culture and our world. And it's not just us that go through this. African-American people have the same issue. And, it's always like, okay, they're ethnic. We're, art. We're history. We're philosophy. They're ethnic. And somehow it means you're kind of less than. And as you know, Carla, we are not less than anybody.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's kind of where my question is going, sort of. So we've been looking at the long and really like ugly history of early representations of Latinos in film, just dating through the 20th century and also up until the present. My question, how do you see Latino representation in film and its evolution over time?
Well, that's a huge question. And I think that, it's got, it has a lot of ups and downs and stuff. When you look at it, because when you look at the silent era in cinema, suddenly, there's all these Latina stars who were hugely popular, like Ramon Navarro. He played Ben-Hur, for crying out loud. That was the biggest silent movie of all time. He's a Mexican star, and Dolores Del Rio and Lupe Velez. And, they had these fantastic, huge stars. And in the silent era, they were very much embraced. And of course, Rudolph Valentino, he was Italian, but still in all, he participated in all of that embrace of the other, and Latinos in general. And some of the movies are remarkable. The silent movie version of Ramona is very hard-hitting, and was in fact Edward Carré, who directed it, was Native. And so it shows the genocide of a Native American village in a silent movie. It wasn't Americans being Westerners and they're killing savages. It was evil white guys, killing innocent natives. And you see this in the silent movie. So when you see some of these films, you're like, wow. But then, talkies come in. And when talkies come in, everybody's talking, they all want to be, slangy and American. And so suddenly African Americans, suddenly Latinos are, relegated to being foolish and the bandidos. And I mean, it's always been there, and there's always the greaser. Even in the silent era, there's a lot of, greasers and negative imaging of Latinos without question. But I'm just saying that there were a lot of positive Latino stars, as well as some amazingly enlightened films that were made then. That all goes away terribly. And suddenly, we're relegated to a very negative image of who we are. And you see these movies, like Viva Villa and etc. That, that are kind of, not kind of, they're extremely offensive. But then, there's Zorro, right? Zorro, he's a hero, right? Now, he's not played by a Latino, but he's still, a big hero guy. And then Tyrone Power plays him, and he's, fighting against corruption and all of these kinds of things. So there are some positive Latino images that are on the screen. So it's a very complicated issue, but overall, you're absolutely right. It's highly negative, highly racist. Women, and one of the stereotypes that I hate worse than any is this hot Latina whose role in life is to sexually liberate white guys, and you see this image constantly, and it's, and that I have a very strong relationship with Jennifer Lopez, and I found her, discovered her and gave her her first role in Mi Familia, and then Selena, but you even see it now, it's like they project this hot Latina image on all of our stars, even to this day. And it's like, when are we going to break that stereotype? When are we going to get away from that stereotype? Because not only is it ugly, it's a total lie. It's completely untrue. By and large, Latinas are very Catholic and very chaste. They're not, loose. They aren't, our people are pretty straight-laced and tight. So this whole idea, and a true stereotype is a lie. So the lie that Latinas are hot to trot is the biggest lie. It's not true, but it's what permeates things. It's a fantasy of white guys. They would like it to be that way, but it isn't that way. So, I'm looking forward to the day that we shatter that. And obviously with the Latina characters like Rosa in El Norte and Tony in Mi Familia and Selena, I worked very hard at trying to redefine and Frida, the Latina image on films, which I think is important. So, we have to shatter those stereotypes, but they keep coming back. It's like, oh my God, you see Sofia Vergara in American, Modern Family. You go, please, can we get past this? It's like, they're always like Charo. Remember Charo? It's like, please, can we get past this? It's really bad. So I think with respect, I think the bandido with all this ugly narco stuff, and the hot Latina with all these awful depictions of Latinas in films and TV, it's just, Carla, it really, 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 really upsets me with how much they persist. So we really have like a double, but here's what we have to do, what I think we have to do as Latinos, okay? Tell the truth. Because if you tell the truth, all that goes away, because none of it's true. So if the powers that be in our industry allow us to tell the truth, our stories, our characters, truthfully, then you don't have to work against the stereotype. See, that's a problem that a lot of Latina filmmakers get into. They go like, oh, I got to write my story to counteract a stereotype, to go against a stereotype, to try to right a wrong of how we've been depicted. I think that's a mistake, because all you end up then are these perfect people that nobody believes are real, So my feeling is, okay, forget about everything and tell the truth. Because if you tell the truth, all the stereotypes go away. We become real people who are no better or worse than anybody else, you know, and people believe you. You know, that's one of the things about El Norte. You know, people believed the movie because it wasn't just all this, like the guy who turns Enrique in is a Chicano, who turns him into the La Migra. Now, I'm Chicano. This happens all the time. I told the truth, right? And guess what? That made people believe the movie. They went, you know what? This movie's is not bullshitting me. It's telling me the truth because it has the courage to also show, you know, everything is not being perfectly positive, right? But overall, the movie is very positive and it's very uplifting and it's very inspirational for people. So I think that you just have to have the courage to tell the truth, but we also need to have the powers that be to give us the opportunity to tell the truth.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. These stories are without a doubt important and need to be represented. And so my next question is kind of a follow-up question. How does seeing these stories in the movies, how can that help change things on the ground for Latinos? How can that change, say, inclusivity, like in just our day-to-day world?
Well, I mean, I think that there are so many levels to that, I think, you know? But I do think, for example, that, you know, a film like Selena is, and, you know, whenever I travel or go anywhere and they ask me, but I made Selena, and everybody, no matter whether they're Latino or not, they go nuts, that everybody loves that movie. So I think that the images that it has put forward of our families and our young, you know, Selena and Chris and all of the characters in the film, really help people have a better assessment of who we are and what our strong values are. I mean, we bring a lot of values to this country that the country is starting to lose track of, like strong family values, for example, community values. So I think that the more we tell the truth about who we are, the more people see that we are bringing something positive to this country, and that our influx of youth and energy and values is keeping this country young and keeping the country vital. So I think that as we tell the truth of who we are and our journey here in this country, we definitely influence people to see us in a different light. Look, books, newspapers, you know, cable news, they don't have heart. They give you stats, they give you information, they give you numbers. But movie stories, drama, when you meet Rosa and Enrique or Selena, now you meet somebody and they have heart and you feel their heart. That's what a movie can do. And so the answer to your question is, the more people feel our heart, the better they will understand who we are, and the more we can be able to move from the fringes into the center of the culture and the you know, of this country. Because right now we're on the fringes. You know, 2% representation in movies with a 20% population, that's pretty pathetic. These stats are really shocking. They really are.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that response. And I really appreciate how you said about finding ways into people's hearts and getting people to know people's hearts. That was really beautifully said and really moving. My last question is, you've already shared some tips, but do you have additional tips for aspiring Latino filmmakers who would like to break into the industry?
Yes, I do. Don't be imitative. That's all I hear from you. Oh, I want to make a Latino Godfather. I want to make a Latino Spider-Man. I want to make a Latino, whatever. I guess they did do a Latino Spider-Man, which was very successful. So rewind that comment. But, yeah, Latino superhero isn't a bad thing. But still in all, they say they want to do things that imitate, I want to do a Latino Indiana Jones. I want to do a Latino Godfather. I want to do a Latino, imitating models that have been forced on us since childhood that we've been seeing with white people all along, right? But the most important thing is to not imitate, but to find what is original to you, that you will make your contribution, that will be an original contribution based on who you are. So that's what I think. It's like when Coppola made The Godfather, he wasn't imitating something else. He was doing something original that was original, and no one had ever seen anything like that before, right? We have to find those kinds of things that are in our culture. It's like my films, El Norte. It's not like anything. It's not imitative of anything. It's not like anything that you see before that it's trying to do a Latino version of a story, about white people. It's a whole original thing that is about us. So, and when you look at 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that's a great inspiration. That novel isn't like anything else. He's not imitating Dickens. He's not imitating, John Updike. He did something totally original that was Latino, and it took the world by storm. Everybody in the world went nuts for that book because they got something new, something different, something fresh, something original. That's what we have to give. And that's what's going to make people embrace us when we produce things that are fresh and original and are unlike anything anybody's seen before. That will ring people's bell. And I think that that's what I would like young filmmakers to do. So my advice to them is find your path. Find your path in life. There's a famous thing that I was inspired by this very early on. When I was in high school, I went to Guadalajara and I studied at the University of Guadalajara for a summer, and I took classes in Spanish and I took classes in pre-Columbian culture. And when I was there, this teacher starts teaching us about Olin. And I didn't know what that was. And Olin in Nahuatl means movement. Okay. And our ancient ancestors believed that everybody had Olin. That's their path in life. And that the society had Olin, the world had Olin, everything has Olin. So what they said is you have to find your Olin, and when you find it, then everybody who's a poet will be a poet, and everybody who's a warrior will be a warrior, and everybody who's a farmer will be a farmer, because everybody has a different Olin. When you find yours, everything the society needs will be taken care of, and then the society will find its Olin, and then the world will find its Olin if everybody finds their Olin. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, how do you find your Olin? How does somebody find it? All right, and the answer is, of course, to them, you find your Olin in what you do, your work. Work is sacred to our ancestors, to the Mayans and to the Mexica, right? They didn't have monasteries to find God. They didn't retire from life to find God. They found God in what they did in their everyday life, in their work. It's interesting, isn't it? But how do you find what is your right work, your right path? And the answer is very profound. The answer is make your heart your face. You take what's within you and you put it here. And the minute you do that, you stop being blind. You're blind as long as your heart is not, as long as you keep your heart hidden and you don't let anybody see it. But the minute you make your heart your face, you're not blind anymore. You can see. The world can see who you are, and you can see the world, and you see your path. And when you find your path, and you know what you must do, then you find God. You do what the society needs you to do, and you join the great family of all of us together, making this a better world. So my advice to young filmmakers is, don't look to Hollywood, don't look to Marvel, don't look to Pixar as your inspiration for what you want to do. Look to your heart, make your heart your face, see your path, and you find what is about you that is original and fresh and new to give to the world.
Thank you, Mr. Nava. That was just beautifully said. Thank you. We really appreciate hearing your perspective on this and your reflections. Now I'll pass it on back to Mateo for some concluding thoughts. And it was great speaking with you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Carla. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Nava, for this incredible conversation. This brings us to the end of our time together. Thank you so much for joining Carla, Madeline, and I to chat about your work and the impact that you've made in the industry. Today, we learned not only about your films, but we also gained some really deep insight into your process and evolution as a creator and storyteller. So thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And we look forward to seeing your future work.
Thank you. And I look forward to sharing my future work with you. And I think that the work that the Library of Congress does is extremely important. And I do want to give a shout out to the Library of Congress and to their initiative and to this particular initiative with the National Registry. I think it is extremely important. It brings a lot of important films to the public again, and it becomes a way for people to understand our heritage and the journey that all of us have been on as filmmakers and storytellers in this, in our country. So I do want to give a shout out to the Library of Congress for the fine work that they do. I served on the committee for a period, and it was always incredibly enlightening and very inspiring. So thank you all. And I also want to say that I find all of you young people very inspiring. I love talking. I love talking with all of you. I found your questions very compelling. And I think that our heritage and our legacy is in good hands with brilliant young Latinos like you all.
Thank you so much.